A woman can be invisible for years, until the night her silence teaches an entire room to bow. The thought moved through Hartwell Manor like a ghost before anyone knew why, passing beneath the crystal chandeliers, along the polished blackwood floors, and into the winter-bright ballroom, where Duke William Hartwell stood beside the wife he had never learned to see. Snow pressed against the tall windows in pale, restless sheets, turning the world beyond the glass into a white blur, while inside, firelight gilded every cruel smile with warmth it had not earned. Evelyn Parker Hartwell stood at William's right hand in a gown of soft gray silk, modest at the throat, plain at the wrist, without diamonds, without pearls, without the theatrical beauty society women used like armor. She was fair-skinned, slight, and quiet, with brown hair arranged simply beneath a ribbon the color of storm clouds. The guests had noticed everything about her except what mattered. They noticed that she did not laugh loudly. They noticed that she did not compete for attention. They noticed that when spoken to sharply, she answered with courtesy instead of wit. And because the world often mistakes gentleness for emptiness, they called her plain. Not to her face at first. They were too polished for that. The insult traveled behind fans, under breath, wrapped in phrases like unsuited, unremarkable, and a curious choice for a duke. William heard enough to understand. He always heard more than he admitted. Yet he remained still, one gloved hand resting on the silver head of his cane, his expression carved from the same cold stone as the Hartwell crest above the fireplace. He had married Evelyn because the arrangement had settled an old obligation between families, not because his heart had asked for her. His heart, he believed, had long ago learned discipline. Evelyn knew this. She had learned it in the small things, the empty chair across from her at breakfast, the letters addressed to my lady rather than my wife, the way William introduced her with perfect manners and no tenderness at all. That night, Lady Margaret Reed decided politeness had become boring. She was tall, pale, and glittering in emerald satin, with a smile delicate enough to hide a blade. "Your Grace," she said, turning toward Evelyn while the room softened into watchful silence. "We have heard so little from the Duchess this evening. Surely she has some accomplishment to share with us. A song, perhaps, or a piece at the pianoforte." A few guests lowered their eyes to hide their amusement. Others looked directly at Evelyn, hungry for embarrassment served on silver. William's jaw tightened, but he did not step in quickly enough. "My wife is not required to perform for anyone," he said at last, his voice calm and distant. It should have protected her. Instead, it sounded like confirmation, as though there was nothing in Evelyn worth hearing. Lady Margaret's smile deepened. "Of course. Forgive me. I only thought every duchess possessed at least one little talent." The words fell softly. They struck hard. Evelyn felt the heat of humiliation rise beneath her skin, but her hands remained still. She looked at William, not pleading, not accusing, only waiting. For one breath, something like discomfort crossed his face. Then duty won again, cold and useless. He gave no answer. Around them, the candles trembled in their tall gold holders. Outside, the storm pressed closer. Evelyn turned from her husband and walked toward the pianoforte at the far end of the ballroom. The laughter died slowly, like a flame deprived of air. Her gray skirt whispered over the floor. Each step seemed too quiet for the attention it gathered. Lady Margaret blinked, surprised that the trap had not made its prey retreat. William straightened. "Evelyn," he said, low enough that only she might hear. She did not stop. She reached the instrument and stood before it for a moment, her fingertips hovering above the polished wood. No one knew that her hands were cold. No one knew that her heart was beating so fiercely it seemed to echo beneath her ribs. No one knew that for years, melodies had lived inside her memory like birds trapped in a locked room. Songs without names, lullabies without mothers, fragments of a life that had vanished before she was old enough to hold it. She sat. The bench gave a soft creak beneath her. Somewhere near the fireplace, a man coughed into his handkerchief. Lady Margaret watched with bright expectation. William watched with something else, though he would not have known how to name it. Evelyn lowered her fingers to the keys. For one impossible second, she feared nothing would come. Then the first note rose into the ballroom, clear and lonely, delicate as moonlight on snow. A second followed, then a third. The melody unfolded slowly, not like the cheerful parlor pieces played by young ladies after dinner, but like a prayer remembered by stone walls. It was tender, ancient, and unbearably sad. The room changed before the song had reached its 10th measure. Fans stopped moving. Smiles faded. Even the servants near the doors grew still. Evelyn did not look up. She could not have explained what she was playing. The music seemed to pass through her rather than from her, carrying the scent of white lilies, the warmth of arms she could not remember, and a woman's voice whispering, "My little star, do not be afraid." Near the center of the room, Ambassador Charles Graves of Valoria went deathly pale. His glass slipped from his fingers and struck the carpet with a dull, harmless thud. No one laughed now. No one breathed easily. William turned sharply toward him, but the ambassador's eyes were fixed only on Evelyn. When the final note trembled into silence, the ballroom remained frozen around her. Evelyn lifted her hands from the keys, suddenly aware of every stare. Lady Margaret's face had lost its color. William took one step forward. Before he could speak, Ambassador Graves crossed the room with the stunned reverence of a man walking toward a grave that had opened to reveal a living soul. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, yet every person heard it. "Madam," he said, "where did you learn the lullaby of the lost princess?" The question remained suspended above the pianoforte like a bell that had been struck once and could not stop trembling. Evelyn sat motionless, her fingers still hovering over the ivory keys, while the entire ballroom seemed to lean toward her. Ambassador Charles Graves stood only a few feet away, his face pale beneath the candlelight, his silver brows drawn together with an expression that was not merely surprise, but grief returning from a place it had been buried. "I do not know," Evelyn said at last, and the simplicity of the answer made several guests exchange doubtful glances. She turned her hands palm down in her lap, as if hiding them might hide the music that had just betrayed her. "It is only a song I have remembered for as long as I can remember anything." Lady Margaret recovered first, because cruelty often returns before kindness does. "How touching," she said softly, though her voice carried. "A mysterious song, a foreign ambassador, and a duchess who suddenly has no explanation. How very convenient." A few nervous laughs stirred and died. William's gaze moved from Margaret to Evelyn, then to the ambassador. His face remained controlled, but something behind his gray eyes had sharpened. He had seen men lie in courtrooms and women lie in drawing rooms. He had built his life on reading the small betrayals of expression. Yet Evelyn looked neither triumphant nor afraid in the manner of a deceiver. She looked lost. That unsettled him more than any confession could have. Ambassador Graves drew a careful breath. "That melody has not been printed, performed, or taught outside Valoria's royal household in more than 20 years. The words moved through the guests like cold air under a door. It was composed for the nursery of King Adrian's youngest daughter." Evelyn felt the room tilt around her. Youngest daughter. Nursery. Valoria. The words touched places inside her that had no language, only fragments. A white canopy above a cradle. A woman's sleeve embroidered with silver thread. The scent of lilies crushed in warm hands. A voice singing in the dark while hurried footsteps passed beyond a door. William stepped closer to the pianoforte. "Ambassador, you will choose your next words with care." His tone was quiet, but it carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "My wife has been made uncomfortable enough tonight." Evelyn looked up at him then. For one fragile second, she wanted to be grateful. But protection given after humiliation had already done its work was a thin cloak in winter. Graves bowed his head. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I intend no insult to the Duchess. Quite the opposite." Lady Margaret's fan opened with a crisp snap. "Surely we are not expected to believe that a forgotten parlor tune proves anything noble." "No," Graves said, turning toward her with unexpected firmness. "A tune proves nothing. Memory proves something. Fear proves something. And that particular final measure, which Her Grace played incorrectly by ordinary standards, was in fact correct by royal tradition. It is a private alteration. A mother's alteration." Evelyn stood too quickly, the bench shifting behind her. "Please stop." The words were barely audible. William heard them. This time, he did not ignore them. "The evening is over," he said. His voice cut through the room without rising. "Our guests will forgive the abruptness." No one argued. Hartwell's servants moved at once, smooth and silent, opening doors, gathering wraps, guiding bewildered nobles toward the entrance hall. The storm outside had softened but not ceased, and beyond the windows the snow still fell over the estate in pale, merciless layers. Lady Margaret lingered just long enough to bend near Evelyn. "Be careful, Duchess," she whispered. "Men admire mysteries only until they become scandals." Evelyn did not answer. She watched Margaret leave an emerald silk and candlelit poison, then turned to find William watching her as though she had become a locked door in his own house. The warmth of the ballroom felt suddenly false. When the last carriage lantern disappeared beyond the frosted glass, William led Evelyn into the west corridor, away from the servants, away from graves, away from every listening wall. The corridor was narrow, paneled in dark walnut, with portraits of dead Hartwells staring down in judgment. He stopped beneath a painting of his father, the late Duke, whose stern face seemed carved from dusk. "Tell me the truth," William said. Evelyn folded her arms against the chill. "I already did. No one remembers a royal lullaby by accident." "Then perhaps my life has been one long accident." He flinched, but only slightly. She saw it because she had spent their marriage surviving on slight things. A glance. A silence. A door not opened. "Where did you learn it?" he asked. "I do not know." "Who taught you?" "I do not know." Evelyn. Her name, spoken so sharply, struck harder than his questions. She lifted her chin. "Do not speak as though I have hidden a treasure from you. You never searched me deeply enough to find even sorrow." The corridor went still. For the first time that night, William had no answer ready. Then, from the far end of the hallway, old Thomas Bennet appeared with a candle in his shaking hand. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn's wrist, where her glove had slipped just enough to reveal a faint mark shaped like a small silver flame. The old servant went ashen. "God forgive us," he whispered. "We hid you too well." Thomas Bennet seemed to regret the words the moment they escaped him. The candle in his hand trembled so violently that melted wax slid over the brass holder and dropped onto the corridor floor, but he did not appear to feel the heat. Evelyn stared at him, her breath caught somewhere between fear and recognition, though she had no memory of the old servant ever looking at her with anything but gentle distance. William stepped between them, not quite shielding her, not quite accusing him, and the difference mattered. "Explain yourself," he said. Thomas lowered his gaze toward the mark on Evelyn's wrist, that pale shape half hidden beneath the edge of her glove. "Not here, Your Grace." His voice was thin with age and something heavier than age. "The walls of this house have carried secrets for longer than they should." William's face hardened. "You will not speak in riddles while my wife stands frightened in her own home." "My wife." The words should have warmed Evelyn. Instead, they arrived too late and too cold, like a fire lit after the room had frozen. Thomas looked at her then, and there was such sorrow in his eyes that she almost reached for him. Almost. "Forgive me, Your Grace," he whispered to her, though the title sounded wrong in his mouth, as if he were addressing the wrong life. "I promised the late Duke I would never be the first to awaken what had been buried." William's hand tightened around the head of his cane. "My father knew of this." Thomas did not answer. Silence was answer enough. Far away, the last echoes of the departing guests faded beyond the great doors, and the manor settled into a hush that felt less like peace than waiting. Evelyn drew her glove back over the mark. "I am tired of being discussed as though I am not standing here." Both men turned to her. The simple authority in her voice startled them more than anger would have. "If there is something to know about me, then I will hear it from the beginning." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "I do not know the beginning, madam. Only the night you came here." Evelyn's heart gave a strange, hollow beat. "Came here. You were very small. No more than 3 years old. It was winter then, too, a storm so deep it buried the lower road under nearly 2 feet of snow. A man named Samuel Parker arrived near dawn with you in his arms, and a letter sealed in blue wax. He was half frozen, but he would not step inside until the late Duke promised aloud that no one would take you from him." A memory stirred inside Evelyn, not clear enough to trust. A rough wool coat, a heartbeat beneath her cheek, someone whispering, "Stay quiet, little star." She pressed her fingers to her lips. "Samuel Parker was my father." Thomas bowed his head. "He was the man who raised you. And by every Christian measure that matters, he was your father. But blood was never the reason he ran." William turned toward the portrait of the late Duke. its painted eyes severe in the candlelight. For the first time in his life, the image of his father did not feel like legacy. It felt like accusation. "Where is the letter?" he asked. Thomas hesitated. "Locked away." "Where?" "In the old music room." William went still. Evelyn noticed it. So did Thomas. The old music room had been locked since before her marriage, a room she had passed countless times without knowing why its door seemed to hold its breath. "That room has been sealed for 15 years, William said. Thomas nodded slowly. "Because that was where your father hid the things that could ruin her, save her, or return her to a world that had already lost too much." Evelyn felt the corridor narrow around her. "Return me where?" Thomas looked as though the answer might break him. Before he could speak, a sound came from deep within the West Wing. It was faint at first, so soft that William almost dismissed it as wind pressing through old stone. Then it came again, a delicate thread of music. Not from the ballroom, not from any servant's hands. A tiny, aching melody, turning slowly through the dark like a memory waking inside a box. Evelyn knew the tune before she understood that she knew it. Her eyes widened. "That is the song." William looked down the corridor toward the sealed wing. Impossible. But the music continued, fragile and persistent, calling through the house with the same sorrow that had silenced an entire ballroom. Thomas crossed himself under his breath. Evelyn moved first. William caught her wrist gently, not to command her, but to stop her from walking into the unknown alone. She looked at his hand on her glove, then at his face. There was doubt in him still. She could see it. But beneath the doubt was fear, and beneath the fear something newly human. "Do not ask me to stay behind," she said. William released her at once. Together they followed the music through the darkened corridor, past covered portraits, past cold windows silvered by snow, until they reached the old music room. The brass key was already in the lock, though no hand had placed it there. Thomas stopped several feet away, trembling. William turned the key. The door opened with a sigh of dust and old wood. Inside, beneath a white sheet drawn over a forgotten pianoforte, a small blue music box played by itself on a table near the hearth. Evelyn stepped toward it as if drawn by a voice only she could hear. On its lid, tarnished but unmistakable, was a silver crown above a single star. The old music room smelled of dust, cold ashes, and lavender sachets long dried into brittle sweetness. Moonlight pushed through the high windows and pale bars, laying silver across covered furniture and the white sheet that hid the forgotten pianoforte like a shroud. The blue music box continued to play on the small table near the hearth, its tiny brass cylinder turning with impossible patience, releasing the same melody Evelyn had carried inside herself without a name. She moved closer, and with every step the room seemed to breathe around her. William remained near the door, one hand still on the key, his face marked by restraint so severe it almost resembled pain. He had entered many rooms as master of Hartwell Manor, but this was the first that made him look like an intruder. Thomas Bennet stood behind him, unable to cross the threshold. "The late Duke forbade me to open this place unless the song returned," the old servant whispered. "I thought it never would." Evelyn reached the table. On the lid of the music box, the silver crown and single star gleamed faintly beneath tarnish. Her fingers hovered above it. She expected fear. Instead, she felt grief so old it did not feel entirely hers. When she touched the lid, the melody slowed, then stopped. In the silence that followed, a small compartment sprang open with a soft click. William stepped forward. Inside lay a folded square of blue silk, a child's ribbon faded at the edges, and a thin strip of parchment covered in marks Evelyn did not understand until her eyes found them. Then her hand moved before thought could stop it. "Paper," she said. William crossed to the covered pianoforte and drew back the sheet. Dust rose in the moonlight. He found a stack of blank music pages in the bench and brought them to her without speaking. She took the pencil beside the music box and began to write. Not words, not notes exactly. Symbols curved and crossed one another with delicate precision, like music trying to become a language. Her hand was steady though her face had gone white. William watched the page fill, his disbelief giving way to something colder and more dangerous to his pride. Recognition. He had seen those marks before. Years ago, in his father's private papers, he had dismissed them as diplomatic cipher, a dead matter from a foreign court. Evelyn stopped suddenly, staring down at what she had written. I do not know how I did that. William did not answer quickly enough. She looked up and saw the old suspicion return to his eyes. It was not harsh. That almost made it worse. It was careful, measured, ducal. The look of a man protecting his house before protecting his wife. You have never seen this room before tonight, he asked. Evelyn's lips parted. The question was quiet. Its wound was not. No. And you have never seen these markings? No. Evelyn, if there is anything you remember, anything Samuel Parker told you, anything at all, you must say it now. Her shoulders stiffened. You are not asking because you trust me. You are asking because I have become inconveniently mysterious. William looked away, and that was confession enough. Behind them, Thomas made a small broken sound. Your Grace, she was a child. And now she may be the center of an international scandal. William said, too sharply, then regretted it as soon as Evelyn stepped back from the table. The blue silk slipped from her hand and opened as it fell, revealing a tiny embroidered crest in silver thread, a crown, a star, and the letter E. The room seemed to darken around it. Evelyn bent to pick it up, but William reached it first. He held the silk as though it might burn him. E, he murmured. Evelyn's voice was soft. For Evelyn. Thomas shook his head, tears bright in his tired eyes. No, madam. William looked at him. Then for whom? The old servant swallowed. For Eleanor. The name moved through the room with the force of a door opening in a house believed empty. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. Eleanor. It did not sound strange. That frightened her most of all. From somewhere deep inside memory came a flash of warmth. A woman bending over her, a necklace catching candlelight, a voice singing the lullaby while calling her little star. Evelyn gripped the table until the vision passed. William saw her sway and reached for her, but she lifted one hand to stop him. Do not touch me because you are afraid I might be important. The words landed with terrible gentleness. He froze. For years he had thought his coldness was dignity. In that moment, under moonlight and dust, it looked very much like cowardice. Before he could answer, hurried footsteps sounded beyond the corridor. A maid appeared at the open door, breathless but careful. Your Grace, forgive me. Lady Margaret Reed has not left the estate. Her carriage will broke near the South Drive, and Mrs. Vale has placed her in the blue guest room until morning. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. William folded the silk in his hand. Thomas went pale. In the quiet that followed, the music box gave one final note, though no mechanism moved. Far away in the guest wing, behind a door painted blue, Lady Margaret Reed was awake, smiling at a secret she did not yet understand. Morning came to Hartwell Manor without warmth. The storm had passed, leaving the estate buried beneath nearly 18 inches of snow, every hedge softened, every iron gate crowned in white, as if the world had tried to cover what the night had uncovered. Evelyn had not slept. She sat by the window of her chamber in the same gray gown, her hair loosened from its pins, the blue silk folded on the table beside her like a small piece of sky, fallen into a room that no longer felt like hers. The name Eleanor would not leave her. It moved through her thoughts with the quiet persistence of the lullaby, touching memories that vanished whenever she reached for them. At 8 o'clock, Mrs. Vale knocked and entered with breakfast untouched by appetite, her expression careful. Lady Margaret is asking to take leave before noon, Your Grace, she said. The carriage is being repaired. Evelyn nodded. Even kindness felt distant that morning. Thank you. Mrs. Vale hesitated. There is also some concern in the household. Evelyn turned. Concern? The housekeeper lowered her eyes. A sapphire brooch belonging to the late Duchess Hartwell is missing from the east cabinet. Lady Margaret noticed the cabinet door standing open. Evelyn understood before the next words came. The room seemed to lose air. Mrs. Vale looked miserable. She suggested it may have been misplaced during the confusion last night. Evelyn stood slowly. Where is my husband? In the breakfast room, Your Grace. With Lady Margaret and Ambassador Graves. Evelyn's hands went cold, but her voice remained steady. Then I should join them. The breakfast room glowed with deceptive civility. Pale winter sun touched the china, the silver coffee pot, the polished mahogany table, and the faces of people trying to appear innocent of expectation. William stood near the fireplace, dressed in black, his eyes shadowed from a night without rest. Ambassador Graves sat rigidly beside the window. Lady Margaret occupied a chair as if it were a throne, wrapped in dark green wool, her smile delicate and tragic. The moment Evelyn entered, silence received her. "My dear Duchess," Margaret said, "I am so sorry to trouble you after last evening's excitement, but something precious appears to have vanished." Evelyn looked at William. He did not speak. That was the first cut. Margaret placed a hand over her heart. "I noticed the cabinet open only because I passed the East Hall at dawn. Such a strange thing." Then Mrs. Vale discovered the brooch missing. "A family piece, I believe." William's jaw tightened. "It may have been moved." "Of course," Margaret said gently. "One hopes so. Yet in delicate circumstances, clarity protects everyone." Her gaze drifted toward Evelyn's chamber door, though they were far from it. "Especially when certain foreign objects were found in unexpected places last night." Ambassador Graves frowned. "Lady Margaret, implication is a poor substitute for evidence." "Indeed," she said. "So let us have evidence." She turned to Mrs. Vale, who had appeared at the threshold with two maids, both pale and reluctant. One carried Evelyn's small travel case. Evelyn recognized it at once. Samuel Parker's old leather case, the one she had brought from the modest home where she was raised, the one place in her marriage that still smelled faintly of cedar and safety. William's eyes flashed. "Who ordered my wife's belongings searched?" No one answered. Margaret looked wounded. "Your Grace, the servants acted out of loyalty to the house." Evelyn crossed the room and opened the case herself. If they meant to shame her, they would not also make her tremble. Inside lay folded linen, a worn prayer book, a packet of letters from Samuel Parker, and on top of them, placed where it had never been, a sapphire brooch surrounded by a square of blue silk. The room went utterly still. Mrs. Vale covered her mouth. Ambassador Graves rose. William stared at the case as if the sight had struck him somewhere pride could not protect. Margaret whispered, "How unfortunate." Evelyn picked up the brooch, then the silk. Her fingers did not shake. She looked at the bright stones, at the false arrangement, at the faces waiting for her to collapse beneath the weight of appearance. Then she looked at William. "Do you believe I stole from your dead mother?" The question was quiet. It emptied the room more completely than shouting could have. William's lips parted, but no answer came quickly enough. That was the second cut. Evelyn nodded once, as if something inside her had been confirmed at last. She turned to Margaret, whose smile had begun to falter under the Duchess's stillness. "I have been poor," Evelyn said, holding the blue silk against her palm, "but I have never been small." The words settled over the table, over the silver, over the stolen brooch, over William's silence. Ambassador Graves bowed his head, not to a title, but to dignity. Margaret's face tightened. "Fine words do not explain stolen jewels." Evelyn placed the brooch on the table. "No, but fear explains a planted one." William looked sharply at Margaret then, too late to spare Evelyn the humiliation, but not too late to see the first crack in the performance. At that moment, Thomas Bennet appeared in the doorway, carrying a sealed envelope yellowed with age. His face was pale, but his voice did not tremble. "Your Grace," he said to William, "before anyone accuses her Grace further, you must read what your father left hidden in the old music room." Thomas Bennet carried the envelope as though it weighed more than silver, more than law, more than all the years he had spent pretending silence was obedience. The breakfast room held its breath while William took it from him. The paper was yellowed with age, sealed in dark blue wax stamped not with the Hartwell crest, but with a crown above a single star. Ambassador Graves rose slowly from his chair. Evelyn saw his hand tighten against the back of it. Lady Margaret's face remained composed, yet the color had drained from her mouth. William broke the seal. For a moment, the only sound was the faint settling of snow against the windows and the crackle of the fire that had become too bright for such a cold room. He unfolded the letter. The handwriting was his father's. He knew it at once, every severe stroke, every disciplined line. The hand that had signed estate papers, reprimands, blessings, and the final instructions after death. William began to read silently. Then his expression changed. Not quickly, not dramatically. Worse than that. Slowly, as if each sentence removed one stone from the foundation on which he had built himself. Evelyn watched him, and despite everything, pity touched her first. She hated that it did. "Read it aloud," Ambassador Graves said quietly. William looked at Evelyn. For the first time, he seemed to ask permission without words. She gave none. She only stood still, holding the blue silk in one hand, waiting to learn whether her life belonged to memory, accident, or someone else's fear. William drew a breath. To my son, should the truth outlive my courage? His voice was steady, but not untouched. The child known as Evelyn Parker was brought to Hartwell Manor in the winter of 1889 by Captain Samuel Parker, formerly attached to the Valerian Royal Guard. She was entrusted to him during the fall of the royal household, when those loyal to the crown believed the youngest princess would be safest if the world thought her lost. A soft sound escaped Mrs. Vale. No one moved. William continued, each word making the room smaller. Her true name, if all marks and tokens remain as given, is Princess Eleanor Rose of Valoria. Evelyn closed her eyes. The name did not strike her like thunder. It settled, terribly gentle, like a blanket placed over a sleeping child. Eleanor Rose. The little star. William's voice faltered once, then forced itself on. She bears upon her wrist the silver flame of the House of Valoria. With her should remain a blue silk ribbon, a nursery music box, and the lullaby known only to the royal chambers. No claim must be made while danger remains. No crown must find her unless she first finds herself. Ambassador Graves lowered his head. Thomas wept silently. Lady Margaret stared at the brooch on the table as if it had betrayed her by existing in the wrong story. William reached the final page. His face turned pale. If my son ever reads this, let him understand what I failed to say in life. Hartwell does not own this girl. Hartwell shelters her. Protect her from every crown and every marriage until she may choose who she is without being used for what she was born to be. The letter lowered in William's hand. No one spoke. There are silences filled with confusion, and there are silences filled with judgment. This one held both. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked first at the blue silk, then at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had called himself her husband while knowing nothing of the promise that had placed her near him. Did you know? She asked. William's answer came at once. No. It was the first time all morning he had answered quickly enough. She believed him, and somehow belief did not make the wound smaller. Ambassador Graves stepped toward her with careful reverence. Your Grace, there are records in the Valerian embassy. Portraits, birth documents, the Queen's private household seal. If you permit it, I can begin formal confirmation today. Evelyn almost laughed, though no amusement reached her face. Yesterday, she had been too plain for a ballroom. This morning, men were asking permission to return a kingdom to her name. Lady Margaret found her voice, thin but sharpened by panic. How convenient that all this appears after a brooch is discovered among her belongings. William turned to her. The look he gave was colder than anger. It was recognition stripped of politeness. No servant searched my wife's case without instruction. No guest knew where the late Duchess's brooch was kept unless she had been watching this house too closely. And no innocent woman smiles before the accusation is complete. Margaret's fan trembled. You cannot mean to accuse me. I mean to investigate you, William said. Thoroughly. The word fell like a locked door. Evelyn did not feel triumph. Only exhaustion. She placed the blue silk on the table beside the brooch, separating truth from trap with one simple movement. Then she looked at William, not as a wife seeking protection, not as a princess receiving homage, but as a woman who had endured being unseen too long. Your father wanted me protected from every marriage, she said softly. How strange that I had to marry his son to learn why. William flinched as if the sentence had found the exact place pride could not armor. Evelyn, do not say my name as though it heals what silence did. The room remained still. Outside, the winter sun rose higher over the buried gardens, bright and pitiless. Evelyn gathered the old letter, the blue silk, and the music box Key Thomas had placed beside the envelope. Ambassador Graves, she said, her voice calm enough to frighten every person who loved control. Please send word to your embassy. I will hear what Valoria remembers of Eleanor Rose. Then she turned to William. And you, your Grace, may decide whether you wish to defend your wife because she is innocent or because she may be royal. I will know the difference. By noon, Hartwell Manor no longer felt like a private estate. It felt like a house waiting for judgment. Snow still covered the long drive, but the road had been cleared just enough for a dark embassy carriage to arrive beneath a sky the color of polished pewter. Two Valerian officials stepped out behind Ambassador Graves, both dressed in sober black coats, carrying a leather case bound with brass locks and the solemn care of men who understood that paper could resurrect the dead. Evelyn received them in the library, not in the ballroom, not in the breakfast room where she had been accused, but among shelves of old books and winter light, where silence seemed less cruel. William stood near the mantel, formal and motionless, while Thomas Bennet waited beside the door with his hands folded before him. Lady Margaret had been asked to remain at the manor until the matter of the brooch was resolved. She obeyed because refusal would look like guilt, but her pride moved restlessly through every room before she did. Ambassador Graves placed the leather case on the table before Evelyn. "Madam," he said, and then stopped himself. His eyes softened. "Forgive me. Until you choose otherwise, I will call you Duchess." Evelyn inclined her head. The courtesy steadied her more than any grand title could have. Graves unlocked the case. Inside lay a small velvet folder, a faded nursery portrait, a strip of royal blue ribbon preserved beneath glass, and a page marked with the seal of the Valerian royal household. He lifted the portrait first. The child in the painting was no more than 3 years old, fair-skinned, brown-haired, solemn-eyed, holding a white lily in one hand and wearing a bracelet with a silver flame charm. Evelyn looked at the face and felt the air leave her lungs. It was not like looking in a mirror. It was worse. It was like seeing the life that had been taken from her still waiting patiently on canvas. "Her Royal Highness Princess Eleanor Rose," Graves said softly, "painted 6 weeks before the uprising that scattered the household." William looked at the portrait, then at Evelyn. The resemblance was undeniable, but it was not the resemblance that broke him. It was her expression, that same quiet endurance, that same childlike effort to be brave without understanding why bravery was being required. Graves opened the next document. Birth record. Silver flame mark noted upon the inner left wrist. Nursery token. Blue silk ribbon embroidered with crown, star, and initial. Private lullaby composed by Queen Helena herself, never published, taught only to the royal nurse, the queen, and the child's appointed guardian. Evelyn touched the edge of the table. "Samuel Parker." Graves nodded. "Captain Samuel Parker. He was believed to have perished in the confusion. Now we know he lived long enough to save you." A tremor passed through Evelyn, but she did not weep. Her grief was too deep for tears to find the surface. "He never told me. Perhaps he loved you too much to return you to danger before danger had passed." William shut his eyes briefly. The sentence landed where his conscience was already raw. Thomas stepped forward then, his voice old but clear. "Captain Parker came through the east gate before dawn. He said the child must be raised without crowns, without court, without anyone teaching her that blood made her worth more than mercy." The late Duke agreed. Evelyn looked at him. "And you all decided for me?" Thomas bowed his head. "Yes, madam." There was no defense in the answer, only truth. The library door opened before Evelyn could reply. Lady Margaret entered without being invited, dressed in traveling violet, her gloves buttoned too tightly over nervous hands. "How moving," she said. "A painting, a ribbon, a sentimental story from servants. Is that truly enough to make a duchess into a princess?" Ambassador Graves turned with icy calm. "No, but the royal cipher she wrote last night is." He removed the final paper from the case and placed it beside the symbols Evelyn had drawn in the music room. The match was perfect. "This is the childhood cipher of the Valerian Royal Nursery. It was designed by Queen Helena for private notes to her daughter. No outsider knew the form." Margaret's mouth tightened. "Forgery is always possible." William stepped away from the mantel. "So is theft. So is planting a brooch. So is cruelty dressed as concern." She looked at him sharply. "You would take her side now?" The room went very still. Evelyn looked at William too, waiting. He did not look at the portrait. He did not look at the seal. He looked only at her. "I should have taken it when she had nothing but her word." For the first time, his voice carried no pride at all. Margaret laughed once, brittle and small. "How noble." "A little late, Your Grace." Evelyn answered before William could. "Yes," she said. "It is." The honesty struck harder than anger. Graves closed the folder and bowed deeply to Evelyn. Thomas followed. Then, one by one, the Valerian officials bent their heads. Not to a rumor, not to a wife, not even to a crown fully restored. They bowed to the truth standing quietly before them. The woman once dismissed as plain stood in the pale library light with blue silk in her hand, and every person in the room understood that they had mistaken silence for emptiness. Evelyn did not smile. She did not triumph. She only looked at the portrait of the lost child and whispered, "I remember the lilies now." The bowing of the Valerian officials did not make Evelyn taller, but it made the room reveal how small it had been. For years, Hartwell Manor had measured her by what she lacked. No glittering dowry, no dazzling beauty, no sharp society wit, no hunger to command attention. Now that same house stood around her, as if its walls had overheard the truth and were ashamed of their echoes. Evelyn touched the portrait of the little girl once, only once, with the back of her fingers. The painted child held her white lily with solemn trust, unaware that names could be hidden, homes could vanish, and love could arrive wearing the face of protection while still taking away choice. "I would like to leave for the embassy," Evelyn said. William's head lifted. The words were quiet, but they struck him more surely than accusation. Ambassador Graves gave a respectful nod. "A room has already been prepared, should you wish for privacy while the documents are reviewed." Thomas made a small wounded sound near the door. Mrs. Vale, who had entered silently with fresh tea no one had touched, pressed her lips together to keep from speaking. William stepped toward Evelyn, then stopped before the movement became a claim. He had commanded rooms all his life. This time, command would ruin whatever remained. "Evelyn," he said. She turned. In the cold library light, her face looked unchanged and entirely altered. Still fair, still composed, still softly framed by brown hair that had loosened during the long morning. Yet something in her had moved beyond his reach, not because she had become royal, but because she had finally stopped waiting to be chosen by someone too proud to see her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," she answered. The plainness of the word left him nowhere to hide. "I should have defended you before there was proof." "Yes. I should have trusted your character before your blood made doubt embarrassing." Her eyes held his. "Yes." Each answer was gentle. Each one cut deeper. William looked down at the ring on her hand, the ring he had given without tenderness and expected her to wear with obedience. "Tell me what I can do." Evelyn looked at the same ring. For one breath, the room seemed to narrow to that small circle of gold. Then she drew it off. Slowly, not in anger, not in spectacle, with the terrible calm of a woman returning something that had never been fully offered. She placed it on the library table beside the blue silk ribbon and the royal portrait. Gold, silk, child. Marriage, memory, self. 3 pieces of a life being sorted at last. "Do not ask what you can do while I am still standing where you wounded me," she said. William's face lost color. "Are you leaving me?" "I am leaving this house." "For how long?" "Until I know whether Evelyn Parker was protected, erased, or merely made convenient." Ambassador Graves lowered his eyes, granting them privacy without leaving. William's voice roughened, though it remained controlled. "I never meant to despise you." Evelyn's expression changed then. Not softened, deepened. "That is the tragedy, William. You did not need to mean it. You only needed to let others do it while you stood beside me." Outside, a carriage was brought to the front steps, its wheels cutting dark lines through the snow. Servants moved through the halls with trunks, cloaks, and the hushed urgency that follows irreversible decisions. Lady Margaret watched from the upper landing, her face pale with fury beneath a veil of dignity she no longer deserved. Evelyn saw her, but did not pause. There were humiliations too small to honor once truth had grown larger than the room that held them. At the entrance hall, Thomas bent his head. "Forgive an old man who obeyed too long." Evelyn touched his sleeve. "Obedience is not the same as kindness, Thomas. But I believe you tried to keep me alive." The words broke him more than blame would have. William followed her to the open doors. Cold air swept inside, bright with snow and winter sun. He did not reach for her. He did not command her. He only stood there, a duke at the threshold of his own home, learning too late that possession is not the same as shelter. Evelyn paused before stepping into the carriage. "You did not despise a plain wife, William," she said, her voice low enough that only he heard. "You despised a woman who had no power to punish you for it." He closed his eyes as if the truth had entered him like winter. When he opened them, she was already inside the carriage, the blue silk folded in her lap, the portrait resting beside her, the old music box held gently in both hands. Ambassador Graves climbed in after her. The door closed. The carriage rolled away from Hartwell Manor, past the black iron gates, across the white road that led toward the Valerian embassy. William remained on the steps long after the wheels disappeared beyond the trees. Snowlight lay over his shoulders. Behind him stood the grand house, the servants, the portraits, the title, the name, everything he had once believed made a man powerful. Before him stretched the empty road where his wife had gone, carrying no crown on her head, yet leaving him with the unmistakable knowledge that a kingdom had just departed in silence. William did not follow the carriage. That was the first decent thing he did after she left. He remained at Hartwell Manor while the sky darkened and the snow along the drive hardened into glass beneath the evening cold. Every room seemed to accuse him in a different voice. The ballroom remembered his silence. The breakfast room remembered his doubt. The library remembered the ring Evelyn had placed beside the blue silk, small, bright, and devastating. By nightfall, he sent for every servant who had touched the east cabinet, every footman assigned to the guest wing, every maid who had passed the blue room before dawn. He asked no questions with anger. Anger would have been too easy. He asked with precision, and precision unraveled what politeness had hidden. A kitchen maid had seen Lady Margaret near the East Hall before sunrise. A footman had noticed blue silk beneath her glove. Mrs. Vale admitted, with shame in her eyes, that Lady Margaret had suggested the search before the brooch was ever officially reported missing. By midnight, the story stood clear enough to cast its own shadow. Lady Margaret had not merely mocked Evelyn. She had tried to bury her under suspicion before the truth could lift her beyond reach. William summoned her to the drawing room at dawn. She arrived dressed for departure, chin high, her violet cloak fastened with a silver clasp. "This is unnecessary," she said. "Then it will be brief," William answered. On the table lay the brooch, the servant's statements, and the blue guest room register showing when she had requested a candle after midnight. Her eyes moved across each piece, and for once, her face failed to obey her. "You cannot prove intent." "I do not need to prove your soul," William said. "Only your actions." He dismissed her from Hartwell Manor and sent a full account to every household that had witnessed Evelyn's humiliation, not as gossip, but as correction. He wrote to the Valerian embassy next, not to demand his wife's return, not to plead his loneliness. He wrote that Evelyn Parker Hartwell, whatever name Valoria restored to her, had been innocent before she had been royal, and that his failure to defend her innocence was his shame alone. 3 weeks passed. The snow melted from the south lawn in narrow silver streams. London learned the truth in careful stages. The lost Valerian princess, the hidden lullaby, the false accusation, the Duke of Hartwell's public confession of error. Society, which adored a scandal until it required self-examination, suddenly remembered it had always found the Duchess graceful. Evelyn heard these reports from a quiet room at the embassy, where white lilies stood fresh each morning and the music box rested beside her bed. The documents confirmed what memory had begun to return. She was Princess Eleanor Rose of Valoria. She was also Evelyn Parker, daughter-in-law if not in blood to the man who had raised her. She belonged to neither name entirely, and for the first time, no one forced her to choose before she was ready. On the 23rd day, she returned to Hartwell Manor in a plain navy traveling dress, without jewels, without royal escort beyond Ambassador Graves' carriage waiting at the gate. William met her in the library, where the ring still lay on the table exactly where she had left it. He looked thinner, quieter, less like a statue and more like a man who had finally discovered the cost of being stone. He did not reach for the ring. He did not reach for her. "Your Highness," he began, then stopped when her eyes cooled. He bowed his head. "Evelyn." The name changed the air. "I have no defense," he said. "Good," she replied softly. A faint, aching smile touched his mouth and disappeared. "I exposed Lady Margaret because it was right, not because I thought it would buy forgiveness. I wrote to the households because your honor should have been defended in the same rooms where it was questioned. I wrote to the embassy because the truth should not depend on my comfort." Evelyn listened, her gloved hands folded before her. "And what do you want now?" William looked at the ring, then back at her. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. Not before a princess. Not before a crown. Before the woman in the navy dress who had once sat unnoticed beside him while an entire room mistook her quiet for absence. Nothing you do not freely give, he said. Not your name, not your title, not your return. Only the chance to become a man who would have deserved you before he knew the world should bow. Evelyn's eyes filled, but no tear fell. She had learned that tenderness without self-respect becomes another cage. She stepped closer and picked up the ring. For a long moment, William did not breathe. Then she closed his hand around it rather than taking it back. Keep it, she said, until you understand that love is not proven by kneeling once, but by standing rightly every day after. He bowed his head over her hand, not touching it, only honoring the boundary she had drawn. Outside, sunlight moved across the thawing gardens. Somewhere in the house, the old music box began to play, not from sorrow this time, but from memory finding room to live. Evelyn looked toward the sound, then back at William. I may return, she said, not as a woman needing shelter, as a woman choosing where her heart may safely rest. William rose slowly, hope restrained by humility at last. No vows were remade that morning. No easy forgiveness turned pain into decoration. Yet when Evelyn walked through the library toward the music room, William did not lead her. He walked beside her, leaving space enough for choice. Some crowns are not made of gold. Some are made of the dignity a woman keeps when the world mistakes her silence for emptiness.